Hello, hello, and welcome to another episode of Teaching with Inquiry Live. Tonight, I just have to start by asking how many of you were in a school today that did not have air conditioning. That was me. If you saw my Instagram live story today, you would have seen that we were hanging out outside underneath the trees in the shade with a bucket of ice sponges just to keep ourselves cool. That was, of course, until it rained. We survived. We got through it, but my golly, it was hot at 38 degrees in my classroom at, let's say, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock this morning. It was pretty darn hot, but we survived. We got through. We got a few things to do. Thank you to some of the wonderful drama circles that we got through today. That was great. But tonight we are going to be continuing our month-long talk on assessment. And we are going to be talking tonight about how to track student learning, especially when we're looking at inquiry-based learning and how exactly we track all of the things that our students are doing, especially when they're not necessarily using paper and pencil tasks like maybe traditionally we are used to. So if not every unit ends and culminates in a test or exam, then how exactly are we supposed to track what students are doing to make sure that we are in fact giving them valid assessments so that we know kind of what we're supposed to be writing on those report cards. So we're gonna go through a few things that I do in my classroom tonight about how I track my students and their learning to make sure that I have all of the data that I need. So one of the ways is honestly just old school paper. And as much, if you have followed me at all for a while, you would know how much that I absolutely am not a huge fan of paper. It is not my favorite thing to have piles and piles of paper, but it's definitely sometimes the easiest thing to just grab and go. Now, when I am more organized and start in September and set up all those routines and get to set the time to set up my classroom, what I generally like to do is I like to have a variety of different formats of how I can do a class list on a sheet of paper. And I like to kind of look at 5 different ways that I can organize those pages. And I have those pre-printed, like 50 copies of each kind. And I have those on my bulletin board behind my desk or in a binder right beside my guided reading table. So I have a quick class list assessment that I can grab when I just need to grab a clipboard, walk around the room, and track some data. Now, it generally never stays on that piece of paper for very long because I'm not a paper person. I will probably lose that, which is not great for the end of the term. So what I end up doing is I will convert that on to digital eventually. So some of the ways that the formats that I use a class list. So it generally have your traditional checklist where you have your class list down on one side and you have multiple little boxes where you can just put a little header on that column and I can just quickly go down the class list and check it. That is great if I'm wandering around the room just having a quick look for, or I'm just tallying up different scores. So for instance, DRA, when I'm trying to tally different scores, I will often just write those out on a class list page so that I can quickly see information. The other kind I like to do is a class list on one side, and I have one column for a check where I can put a checklist or a mark, and then I have a line beside that where I can put their names. And I'm going to eventually put all of these examples in the comment section of this video when it's done. But I'll be completely honest with you, tonight it was a crazy hot day, so I'm a little bit behind the 8 ball here, but I will have all of these examples up for you later so that you can kind of see how I do that without obviously my names attached. So I have the checklist with a note space that's aligned. So I have my entire class list all on one page. They have my students. They have one place for me to put a grade or a checklist, and then they have a little strip of a line where I can just put a quick note as to maybe a next step or something that they need to do. I also will organize my class list so that I have a multitude of boxes. So if I think about a box for each student that's about that big on a piece of paper, now they're all not going to fit on the same page. So I will often do my grade 4s on one side of the page, and on the back side of the page will be my grade 5s. Now, if I have that kind of page, that's really great if I am conferencing with students or I want to take a variety of notes. So I have essentially like a note box page so that I can track students that way. And the fourth is a seating plan notes page. So this is a little bit craftier, but what I end up doing is I open up my PowerPoint or Keynote. I actually use Keynote myself, but it works on both PowerPoint and Keynote. If you just go into either PowerPoint or Keynote and you have your classroom as a landscape and you just use those shape tools and you pull out a square or a rectangle for your students and you simply just try to group them in using as much white space as possible, but I have tables, so I can essentially just put table 1, table 2, table 3, table 4, and table 5 kind of in a horseshoe around, and then maybe some information on the piece of assessment in the middle. But if I have my class list, just taking those shape boxes and being able to manipulate them and move them around on a PowerPoint slide is a really simple way to put an assessment. And then that's great if you're leaving for a supply teacher because you have somewhat of a setup for there. It also lets you, sometimes when you're walking around the room, if you ever notice, I notice it all the time, but when I'm walking around the room trying to do a quick check assessment, my kids aren't ever sitting in alphabetical order. So if I'm going to table 1, I've got kids all over my list, and sometimes that's inconvenient. So if I've got my list organized sometimes by how they're sitting in a seating plan, that does make a very quick assessment. Okay, hit table 1, see what they're doing, quick check, 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 get everybody knows what they're doing, and I can move on. And that is really easy for me to kind of quickly do a check mark or a frowny face or an X if they're not quite getting it. And I'm just doing kind of a quick formative assessment that way to see status of the class. The third old school paper way is a conference note. So this is a little bit different. It's not necessarily a class list, but I do use a lot of them. And this is quickly, if I am conferencing with a student, I want there to be some record of that. So I will quickly just meet with the student. I'll jot down those notes if I need to on a piece of paper, if I don't have anything set up digitally beforehand. And I will just have a general conference page that I can just simply grab, take the student, scribble in what we talked about, and I have it, and they can have a copy of that. They can keep that and put it whatever book they have for whatever subject we're talking about, and then I simply just snap a picture of it, and that's how I keep track of that paper. So they take the paper with them on that conference page because it's really important that they get that feedback back, but I have a copy of it because I just take a snapshot of it. And that moves into my own need to keep it digital whenever I possibly can. So I am 10 years into teaching and I still can't find a system to organize paper that I'm 100% happy with. It's just not ideal for me to do it. And I don't like it. And when I do have these piles and piles of paperwork, when it comes to report card writing time, like right now, I get really overwhelmed by stacks and stacks of paper and the inability to analyze kind of what all that means. So whenever possible, I take all of those paper notes, I get them digital as quickly as possible. So sometimes, on those staff meeting days where you might have some free time, or maybe it's not free time, however you want to use your time, that's a great time to go through those paper assessments and quickly just upload it into my digital gradebook. So, or sometimes I just take a photo of those papers and then I just have them, and I can do that right around maybe report card time, because that's generally a good time to do it. So I've tried to input those all into digital. And the reason I really like putting all of my assessment into digital is because when I have my assessment in, say, a grade book like a Docio or even Excel or Google Sheets, what it allows me to do is I can use the computing power to analyze the information. So I can have them highlight different cells in different colors based on what the grades are, and I can quickly kind of see in a visual way, because I'm more of a visual person, I can visually see where my class is and what it looks like, and I find that really easy for me. It also means if I'm taking photos of different student work and I'm putting that into a grade book, It also means that I am capturing that assessment. And if I do lose something, it's inside my iPad. And if my iPad crashes, it's saved to the cloud. And if the cloud crashes, it's probably backed up to a secondary cloud service anyways, knowing kind of how I work in my brain, that I always want it saved to multiple locations so that I have access to it whenever I need it. So if I've left something at school, I can just pull it up on my computer and it's not a big deal. So I really like to keep things digital. Now, some of the ways that I do that, again, is I take photos. I will take a quick exit check. So as they're walking out the door, they can give me a piece of information and I can just quickly add that in if it's like a yes, no, or a maybe, or yes, they get it, no, they don't, as they're walking out the door. I've even had them do self-assess where I ask them to rate themselves 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 as to how comfortable they are with, say, a lesson, especially feedback for math. And if I have them all hold up their hands, if I just take my iPad and take a photo of them, then I've now captured all of their self-assessment. And I just have to make sure that the photo I take, I have actually got all those fingers in there, which I find really handy because in that moment, I'm not recording all of the information, but that photo is. And I can take that and reflect on that back as I'm lesson planning that night by just quickly looking at the photo and grouping students. So if I need to group students for, say, a guided math lesson the next day, I can quickly look at that photo of their fingers and let them know how they're feeling after that, say, fractions lesson that we just covered. So that's sometimes handy to quickly get notes. I will take photos of them working throughout the day to capture what they're making, what they're building. I will video conversations if I need to, because I need to capture that data and have that evidence. And it's all just sitting in my photos for me to access when I need to. So I also have them using digital Google Forms for, say, writing reflections. So I haven't done that this year. Getting that set up, joining in halfway through the year, was just not something I was willing to tackle. Things had to be dropped off the wayside as I'm coming back in halfway through the year. But definitely next year, one of the things my students will be doing is using our Google Form writing conference feedback, I guess is what I call it. They will be using a Google Form to provide a self-assessment for their individual writing tasks that they're doing prior to conferencing with me so that they have a way to track that digitally. And one of the reasons I really like that is because I can then analyze, actually, I don't even have to analyze it. Google Forms will analyze their answers for me so that I can quickly see as the status of the class where my students are working and what they need to work on. And I can see their individual results within that form so that we can talk about those in conference with them. And then I do follow that up with a paper feedback form that they can keep in their duetting as well as take home to their parents. So one of the things that's really important is with all of this, assessment is great, but assessment without that feedback where we're giving that feedback to our students makes it pointless. So we absolutely, if we're going to be capturing all this data, we need to capture it, but we also need to provide plenty of opportunities for students to be given feedback because that is really where they're going to improve most of their learning is by going through that feedback loop and improving their work based on the feedback that you give them. So sometimes this is really hard because sometimes we're not sure if they even pay attention to our feedback. And holding them accountable to using that feedback and improving on it is definitely something that I've had to practice, and using that information constantly, having students constantly reflect on success criteria, referencing it constantly with them, pointing out where it is that routine and rehearsal of using the success criteria and then using that while you're giving them feedback, while they're self-assessing is really the key to making them actually use that stuff that you hang up on the wall. And it's training them to get them used to using that. And then giving them feedback that's relevant to that success criteria. And then having them prove when they come back to you a second time that they have taken that feedback and acted on it. Now, not every student is going to be great at acting on this, but some students are better than others, and you can get those students to improve. Some take a little bit longer, but you can get them to make those improvements. And some of the tremendous growth that you see in your students, especially in writing or even in some of their math thinking and justifying of their answers, is really the main reason, the pivotal thing that happens in my classroom that makes a difference is providing that feedback from that assessment. That's really key. I'm just looking at some of the questions here. And I'm just going to go with Wendy. Thank you for your questions. I see that you have, what are the digital grade books that, there's Wendy's question. What are the digital grade books that you like? I have used two primarily. One is Markbook, as it goes with Plan Board from chalk.com. I've used that one. I'm relying less on it for some reason this year. My brain just doesn't seem to be wrapping around doing planning digitally this year. I don't know what's going on with my head, because normally I'm very much a digital planner. So this year, I'm not relying on that very much. Right now, I am relying a lot actually on Adocio. And one of the reasons I really like Adocio for my grade book is the ability to link it with Google Classroom. That has kind of been key. So if I mark something in my Adocio app, I just did it on the previous Friday. I was marking some students' reading responses. I was filling it out in my grade book, and then I can link that to Google Classroom, and those marks automatically transfer to Google Classroom, and students are updated with their marks based on that assignment. So I found that really handy, that I can link my Adocio straight with Google Classroom, and having those, the ability to app smash those two are absolutely great. And you also asked about, what about Google Keep? I have not used Google Keep yet, but a friend of mine, you probably recognize her store from TPT, the Rowdy teacher, Shauna Rao, she said she was using Google Keep. So it's my plan to maybe pick her brain about how she is using Google Keep and looking at what that looks like for her in her classroom. That's maybe my goal, is to pick her brain. And then, of course, I'll bring that back to you to figure out how to do it. Or maybe I can entice her to come join us on the show. Shauna, that's a shout out to you, my friend. You can come on this show and talk all about all the amazing things you're doing in your classroom. So that is one of the things. Christy, I see that you have, do you have any experience with FreshGrade? I don't have any experience with FreshGrade. I have not heard of FreshGrade. If it links with Google Classroom, you'll have to let me know. That is my digital learning management tool of choice. I know that there is a push to use the D2L. It's not going to happen. Hub is not going to happen in my time until things improve in terms of student friendliness. So right now I am relying on Google Classroom. I haven't used FreshGrade, but now that you mentioned that, I should maybe look into that and see what that is like, because I always like to try something new and see what's going to work. My biggest problem with Adocio always has been that I can only access it on my iPad. And unfortunately, this is my life. This computer is my life. And if I can't access it on my computer, sometimes that is a limitation of Adocio at times. So that is definitely one for the feedback. So the last thing, I think the elephant in the room is, so we've got this assessment, and how do we communicate that with parents? Because, there's parents and they actually want to know sometimes how their kids are doing. And sometimes it makes our life a little bit easier if we let them know how their kids are doing. So how do we take, especially if we're using digital and paper, and how do we take all of the things that we're doing and actually make it make sense so parents have an idea throughout the term of how their students are doing? Now, completely honest with you, I experiment with this all the time in terms of what's the best way. Number one, I do give my parents access to their students' Google Classroom. I unfortunately don't have the ability to actually link them as parents in Google Classroom, but I do make sure I let them know that they can log in to their students' Google Classroom. And if they put their students' Google Classroom on their phone, then when I hand something back to their child, it'll ding on their phone, which will let them know that A, there's an assignment, B, there's some assessment that they need to look at, and C, they can stay on top of what their kids are actually working on. And that's where they're going to be on top of the most things, is if they are linked up to their child's Google Classroom. So for those keen parents that really want to know everything, they can definitely access their child's Google Classroom. That's number one. Number two for writing is I started this year to send home student conference forms. So after they did their self-assessment and after we talked and we met, I did fill out a little student conference form that indicated their writing, what they were working on, what their next step was going to be, as well as it indicated not a grade per se, but essentially it gave the levels of the progress report. So it said progressing very well, progressing with some success, because of course we all know we are annoyed with the progress report that it doesn't have a some success progress report. So I added one in, and then progressing with difficulty. So you've got those 4 areas. So they can pretty much see where they are, but it's not necessarily a grade, because I keep talking about how writing really comes down to they're constantly improving over the term. So looking at that progress. Now those forms go home, so parents are required to sign those so that they can keep on top of how their child is doing in writing in particular. Now sometimes those don't come back, so I do end up taking a photo of those before I send them home, but that is for the students and the parents to track it. Another thing I do, which I've just started doing, which is super handy, is grabbing some Avery labels. And if you look for the Avery labels that are like 10 to a page or 6 to a page or 8 to a page, you can go on Microsoft Word and you can print out you can create a 1-point rubric that fits on those labels, and the labels are maybe like that big. If you can print out a rubric that goes on each label, as you're marking someone's work, you can quickly just fill in the rubric, but don't peel it and put it right in their book right away. And once you're done everyone's assessment, now you have a page full of labels, which can easily be run through the photocopier. So now you keep the copy that you just photocopied that has everyone's rubric and their name and all their marks. So you keep that page, or take a photo of it, or put it in your grade book, however you want to do it. And then after you've finished all the assessing and you have everyone's rubric completed on those labels and you photocopied it, then you peel it off and you actually put it in their notebooks, and then they have it. And you're not recreating things, you're not doubling things up. It's smack dab right there, stuck in their notebook. So it's not peeling off, and they have it. And then parents they take it home and they sign it. And I found that that is also a helpful way to get parents to see assessment, and it's coming home a bit more routinely than maybe I had done in the past. So those are kind of 2 handy tips that I have been using lately to communicate a little bit more with parents. The third is creating a blog. Now I know this is ominous for some people, but it has been made. My board uses WordPress. I use WordPress for Madly Learning, so that is pretty handy for me. But having a blog, and I'm not blogging like I do on Madly Learning, but I do update what is happening in my classroom, and I do that every 2 weeks if I'm good. I haven't done it in a month. I've been really not so great about that. But if I do that on the classroom website and I update parents as to what's happening and what's coming ahead, what are our learning objectives for the month or for the next 2 weeks, then parents can be on top of what's expected and they have something to talk about with their students. Now, the biggest complaint is parents don't ever check the website. It's true, they don't. So what I end up doing is I essentially set up a system that's like Remind, but it's not Remind. And parents aren't going to get charged for text messaging, which is a new one. But what I end up doing is I use a service called MailChimp or MailerLite. I've used both. And this allows me to send, every time I write a blog post, I have it automatically synced up so that every time I send a blog post, it automatically sends an RSS feed update via email to parents. So if I post a blog post at 4 p.m., the next 24-hour cycle, the next 4 p.m. So if I post it tonight, if I posted a blog post tonight on my classroom blog, tomorrow at 4 p.m., that would be emailed to every parent on my list. And through there, I can also track which parents are checking, which is kind of handy to know if parents are actually looking at that information. But I can track that, and parents can see that they don't actually have to go to the website. That information, the full blog post, is delivered directly to your email inbox. Now, it's the same kind of service that you would hear from me, when I email you from Madly Learning, if you get any of those emails that have the little Madly Learning header at the top, those emails are also from an email service provider that helps me to send out those emails to you. And I use the same thing for my parents in my classroom, and I set it up as an RSS feed that goes out to parents, and that way they know kind of what's happening. So it is a form, it's a way for me to communicate how I'm assessing what's happening in my classroom with the parents in our community so that they know what's going on. So because I find where I teach, it's really important. I need to get on top of it so parents know what is happening prior to happening. And I'm not perfect, and there are plenty of things that get lost along the way. And these are just some of the things that I do to help me get through the day so that when report card time comes around, I got something to say about those kids that are in front of me every single day. So that's all I have. Hopefully some of this wasn't too overwhelming. If there's anything you want to know more about, just drop a comment in the section. I can always do another live video over the summer telling you about how those things look and work, especially if you want a more detailed walkthrough about how some of that works for me. I am going to drop in the examples of some of my assessment checklist pages in the comments after I go live tonight. I think I might have a little bit of time to be able to do that tonight. So I'm going to do that tonight for you so that you can see kind of the different things that I was talking about tonight. If you want, as with always, if you want to see tonight's blog post that goes with this, which will have all of that information there, you can find that on www.madlylearning.com. And if you want the show notes to tonight's episode, including the transcript of this video, links to the podcast replay, the YouTube show, or the blog post again, you can go to the show page that's dedicated just to this show at www.teachingwithinquiry.com. And that's where you can get the transcript, you can get the podcast, the YouTube show, all of the kit and the caboodle. Everything is there. So thanks again for joining me. I will come back and see you next Monday at 9 p.m. where we wrap up and finish up talking about assessment and getting ready for the summer and our enjoyment and all the things we're doing. So thank you very much for joining me, and I will see you next week. Bye for now.